Peace, everybody. It is I, the Emma, Energy Master Allah, and you are watching the Leopard in the Mirror, Canticle of the Mutant Guardian lecture series. It is episode 6. We are still in book 1, The Descent of Knowledge, and we're going into Canto IV, which is Culture or Freedom, the Leopard of Funk. If you don't already have that book, make sure you grab that on Amazon or your favorite platform. Right there. Physical copies only, baby. In case that grid goes down, you got something you can hold in your hand. Alright. So as always, I'm recording this live on Facebook, and then I will be posting it on YouTube. If you haven't already subscribed to the YouTube, make sure that you do that. Energy Master channel, so you can catch all of these broadcasts. Like, subscribe, share, all of that. Don't just hog it to yourself. Each one teach one, baby. Alright, so without further ado, just like we always do here, I'll read the canto and then we'll go through it. Alright. Canto IV, Culture or Freedom, the Leopard of Funk. When the silence broke, it wasn't with thunder, it was with bass. Low, ancestral, rolling up from the marrow of the earth, a heartbeat older than words. I felt it before I heard it, the pulse that stitched galaxies to the same divine drum. Somewhere between heaven and Harlem, between Lagos and Detroit, the air split open, and out stepped a man dressed in sound. He wore rhythm like a crown of mirrors, each reflection a different lifetime. Pharaoh, preacher, parliament, dog turned God, ancestor turned amplifier. He laughed like lightning cracking vinyl. Boy, he said, the funk ain't a genre, it's a memory. He called himself the Leopard of Funk, but his eyes were canines. Loyal, mischievous, hungry for creation. He said he'd been a dog so long, he had to die 9 times to remember he was cat. He showed me how freedom feels when it's lived through sound, not rebellion, but resonance. Every slap of the bass was an amen, every groove a genealogy. The mic became a scepter, the studio a temple, and all who entered became citizens of the jam. Culture, he said, ain't what you wear, it's what you share. It's the architecture of your soul built in real time. He taught me that freedom is not escape, it's design. Every riff has a rule, every chaos a chord. The funk works because it listens even while it leads. In his orbit, I met the others, the painter priest, his brush a tuning fork that colored silence with geometry, the quiet mason who built bridges between empires without needing his name on them. They were griots of the invisible, custodians of the groove. I didn't yet know I'd be counted among them. For a time, I slept on couches and dreamed on carpets, where ashtrays and halos shared the same table. No thrones, no crowns, just sound and smoke and laughter. He said, ain't no kings here, only frequencies. And for the first time, I believed him. When the session ended, the silence hummed different. It wasn't empty anymore, it was full, like the moment before lightning realizes it's been thunder all along. I stepped out into the night, and the stars rearranged themselves into staff lines. Somewhere, the Guardian nodded in rhythm. Culture had taken root. Freedom had found its pattern. The leopard had learned to dance with his own shadow. All right. Boom, boom, boom. So let's go through this. So this is, once again, there's some literal connections here. This is lived experience here. Okay, and so in case I didn't make it clear in the last episode, the Leopard of Funk represents not simply George Clinton, but it's an embodiment of my experiences with George Clinton and P Funk in general. Okay, it says when the silence broke, it wasn't with thunder, it was with bass. So we're talking about the low end frequency. And then it continues in here saying, low ancestral rolling up from the marrow of the earth, a heartbeat older than words. I felt it before I heard it, the pulse that stitched galaxies to the same divine drum. So when you're talking about the low end of the spectrum, you're talking about gravitation, you're talking about bass, you're talking about the slow, low hum, the murky, the primordial from which all things rise. And so the whole philosophy of the funk, if you want to call it that, is that everything is on the one. So Bootsy Collins, when he used to play for James Brown, you know, James Brown basically led the way on the funk. He just wanted to hit that first beat, that down beat. He said, Bootsy, you can play all that other stuff you want, but just give me that one. As long as you hit that one, you play all that other stuff. Because Bootsy knew how to play, you know, whatever else, but he had to learn how that funk worked. You're always looping back to that one, and it's that DNA that would eventually give rise to hip hop. So hip hop was built on the funk. When you take the funk out of hip hop, it just becomes corporate, and that's why you got all these pop niggas out right now. Excuse my vernacular, but hey, you wanted the art, you wanted me, you wanted the Emma. I'm gonna give it to you raw, because that's what the funk is. All right, and then it's from that effluvium, that dust, that the first man was made. So you've been told and telling a story about a man being made from dust, the part that's the refuse, the part that's thrown away. But then ain't it the fertilizer that make the flowers grow? And so that all it's doing is returning to its original form. That's what the funk is. It's the embodiment. It was the resurrection on American soil of a beat that had been within us since the motherland. And so the trance-like drumming and chanting and beating, these were all the things that arise again when the funk emerges as a genre in America. And you know, I don't know about your funk, but make my funk the P funk. And if you can't tell the difference, you're the reason why. Because it's a lot of stuff. Just go and try to tell an AI right now to make a funk song, and it's always gonna make the same sound and stuff. And you've heard generic funk, but it ain't got that thing to it. People forget that the primordium for the P funk was the Parliaments, who was a doo-wop group. George then wanted to be part of Motown because that was the biggest thing smoking. And then he became a writer over there. And so, built on that foundation, and then you bring in the psychedelic elements of the 60s, and you make sure that you hit on that one, you at least got the start of the formula right there. Somewhere between Heaven and Harlem, between Lagos and Detroit, the air split open and out stepped a man dressed in sound. So we call Harlem Mecca because that's where Allah first gave the young brothers the knowledge of self. Lagos is Nigeria, Detroit is Michigan, and in between there you got a bunch of water, but you also got the East Coast. And so George Clinton is actually from the South. He's from North Carolina. Like, he grew up, they spent a lot of time in both Newark, New Jersey. Spent a lot of time over there in Detroit working with the Bass Brothers and whatnot. But he was from North Carolina. Somewhere to start with a K, if I recall. I forget what that city is, what that town is. But yeah, but you find that that's a kind of common thing. I spent time in Charlotte. I still got family up that way. RZA, when he was a kid, his family spent a lot of time down in Charlotte staying with his uncle. You know, and that's where he got his foundation in spirituality in the form of, Southern Christianity, Baptist, all of that first. So he knew those Bible stories back and forth. But then when he got the knowledge of self, it helped complete on it. And so, like myself, it didn't present itself as a replacement for something, but rather that which aligns and structures and brings everything together. So it allows you to draw up out of anything that you read or engage with the truth beneath it. And you'll find, as you put the knowledge of self to the test, as long as your understanding is in place, and then that's your foremost aim. I could have sworn I turned this ringer off. Excuse me, y'all. Anyways, if that's your foremost aim, is understanding, because remember, love and understanding are one quality and not two separate things. And peace is supreme understanding for the benefit of the whole. So if that's actually your aim, you don't go into learning something trying to figure out what's wrong. You're seeing what's missing from your own understanding that would have you see it as right and exact. Have you revealed the hell that you must go through by checking out the wisdom? Do you know that language? This is something I was thinking about in depth this morning. I was meditating on the idea that it's funny that if you were to look at a textbook on rocket science right now, you're looking at all those like equations and the physics and everything else, you'll say to yourself, oh, this is complicated. This is complex. And we're all about, simplifying and making it simple so it can be understood. Well, the fact of the matter is, physics notation is actually designed to be the simplest form because it's clear. So it's like, no two people are going to mistake, okay, that's a number one, that's a number two, that's the operation or whatever. So it's the language that is clearest. But once again, if you don't know the language, of course it's going to be complex to you. So whenever brothers say that, whenever they look at something like that, and then they say that that's confusing or that's trick knowledge, because you got to make it simple, what they're really saying is, I'm putting the burden on that system to make me understand it, rather than saying, is my understanding based on my observation? Or did I learn the wisdom first? Did I get the experience? Did I learn the language? To those people who actually put in the time, went to school for that and actually learned the notation, actually learned the language, actually learned the terminology, they look at that textbook like it's Dr. Seuss. They understand it. They went through that hell to get, heaven is what you make it, hell is what you go through. Love hell right. And so you trying to, if you're constantly trying to take the wisdom out of the equation, that's largely what's wrong with society right now. It's like in this information age, this digital era of ours, you got access to all the knowledge you could ever want nowadays, but the children don't value wisdom nearly as much as they value the knowledge. And then they allow their knowledge to be the understanding, which is to say, you read something and that's it. You spit and recite a lot of facts that you looked up at each other, but unless you take that knowledge and you actually apply it in life and then teach your experience of it, it's not wisdom. Wisdom is what you get from the older generation because they've seen it and they've done it. They're teaching you based on what they've been through. It doesn't mean that they're always right. But when they share their experience, you're able to see for yourself, oh, okay, well, I probably would have did this or that different. So let me try that out. Let me try out my hypothesis. And then if it works when you do it differently, there's something new that you understand about it that they didn't understand. But at least you had a starting point instead of you starting from scratch. I believe it was the brother Divine who said, it was a quote that him and RZA's mother used to, it was something that she used to tell them. It said, a smart person learns from their mistakes, but a wise person learns from others' mistakes. Something to that degree, And that's real. It's like, yeah, you have to go out there and get your own experience. But if you do the knowledge to the wisdom of those who've already done it, you'll cut out a lot of the fat and you'll save yourself a lot of time. Instead of you out there poking around in the dark, you'd be like, okay, well, I know not to go that way, but let me see what's up in this direction. It's still uncharted territory, but at least I won't waste my time over there knowing that it's a dead end. And that's what we got to get back to, just as a people in general or whatever, because it's just like the story of the Hebrews, the Israelites going into the desert, and after a few generations, they were so far removed and detached from their ancestors' ways and their original teachings, that they were lost and they made certain cultural mistakes and things of that nature. But that's exactly what we're dealing with right now. And so if we automatically just making the knowledge the understanding, that's essentially you making a father out of a child. You know what I mean? It's like you making the babies grow up too soon. You picking that fruit before it's ripe. The serpent telling somebody they God before they really understand what that word means. You know what I mean? And I know it's our responsibility to teach the babies, but at the same time, we've got to understand nuance, and we got to understand how people hear things at certain ages, and certain things that because of your experience, you hear it differently than you would have had you not known anything about the world yet. He wore rhythm like a crown of mirrors, each reflection a different lifetime. Pharaoh, preacher, parliament, dog turned God, ancestor turned amplifier. It's some wordplay right there. So as you know, even though I used AI as an assistant to help, structure things and, have hours and hours of discussion, just to reflect my ideas back at me and whatnot, and contextualize things within the larger literary corpus, if you will. I went through and I edited the hell out of this thing because sometimes the voice just wasn't. I was like, nah, this ain't funky. I got to make sure that this certain wordplay that's on point, or else it's just gonna sound like some mess, And so right in here, you got some wordplay. Like for instance, dog turned God. The word dog backwards is God. Like you know, that's a visual pun right there, if you will, and it's following the mention of a crown of mirrors. So it's literally the word dog and God are mirror reflections of each other. And so this particular verse right here is basically reflecting like all the changes and transformations that George went through with like his image and the sound and just different things. After he's how old George now? George is 80. Let's see. He getting to those mid 80s, and he was grown in the 50s. Let's just put it that way. But if you are fortunate enough to be around for that long in an industry like the music and entertainment industry, you don't make it that far without going through a personal evolution. It doesn't mean changing up to be something that you're not, but it's exploration of other chambers of who you are, other dimensions that people haven't viewed you, angles from which they haven't yet viewed you, the geometry of you, the more complete picture of you. And in the so in the Divine Comedy, particularly in the Inferno section, when Dante runs into the leopard, this is more indicative of the more common Eurocentric understanding of the leopard with regards to something that is like a trickster archetype, or a shapeshifter, something like this. It's an aspect of ourselves and in literature, just in different arenas. The leopard often plays the role of this figure that basically helps you understand the temperature of a situation by presenting the challenges. So this concept of the hell that you go through in order to get right is largely embodied within that motif. And then this overall canto is the fourth canto, so it's dealing with culture of freedom. Culture is one's way of life. The culture of I God, I self, Lord, and Master is the culture of freedom. And so what that's telling you right off top, that number 4 is 2 plus 2. So there's two different types of wisdom. Is wisdom, you wise the dome, or is wisdom where you to be dumb. Originally, it doesn't mean not having intelligence. It means not being able to speak. And so remember, just a moment ago, I was telling you that part of the reason that you looking inside of that textbook on rocket science, the reason that it looks so complicated, so complex and whatnot is because you just don't speak the language. If you speak the language, it's simple. Like you take for granted that it took you years to learn English when you were a little kid and a baby. And so somebody who comes over here speaking it for the first time, and you seeing they used to use that too. Like they used to make, immigrants and foreigners and people in other countries seem and sound like they were stupid. You know what I'm saying? But then these people were geniuses and brilliant in their own language. A language is a whole world. Like it really is. It's like anybody that can speak multiple languages, they tell you it's almost like they have a slightly different personality in each different language. Like there's a certain spirit or flavor to different languages, and like even the words that are either included or missing from a language sets the tone. Because there's entire concepts in, like, let's say like Japanese that are represented by a single character that doesn't necessarily translate cleanly into an English context. It's like you just have to know the culture. You'd have to have lived it to kind of really understand the concept. And on the other hand, if I recall correctly, they say Russian. I don't even think they have a word for compassion. And so that reflects the kind of frigid Siberian cold kind of rigidity that, a lot of people kind of associate with Russia and this form of communism and things of that nature. But at the end of the day, it's the language. And so your DNA is language as well. Like there'll always be, because we're all human and we're all one of our primary distinctive attributes as a species is the capacity for speech. Because of this, there are just certain aspects of it that will always be consistent. There is never going to be a case where you have one person who talks out their mouth and then somebody else who's talking comes out of their belly button or something crazy like this, or whatever. There's consistency in structure with regards to that. There's only so many ways that you can move the tongue, teeth, and gums, in order to produce sound in the first place. You can get creative and play around with it, but it's still a limited range that's dictated by the physicality itself. So, and that's part of the wisdom. Okay, and so because of this, there's places where we can innovate and there's places where we can't. But just like with our genetics or whatever, there's more diversity on the African continent genetically than there is anywhere else in the world. Like, it's easy for outsiders to come and then just be like, oh, everybody black, they all African, lump the whole 50 countries into one category. But on a genetic level, there's more diversity between, neighboring tribes than, even in some cases, even between black and white Americans, because of the admixture and the consistent grouping over here over the past few centuries or whatever. We're actually in some cases more similar, and in fact, the genetic profile of an African American today, let's say they got some genetic markers in common with a person from the Yoruba tribe in West Africa, they are less similar to the Yoruba of today and more so like the population from hundreds of years ago that diverged into several of the existing tribes and classes of today. So there was a group that was common to all of them that our ancestors were part of and drawn from. And so a lot of those markers from those other groups will show up in our profile. So it look like we'll have everything: Yoruba, Igbo, Bantu, all sorts of stuff, because it was originally one group that divided up a little more cleanly and then became, entire tribes and identities today. But then we're still part of that original funk that they rise out of. And if you watch my previous lecture series, I showed you some surprising etymology that tied the word funk and parliament to a related chain of words in Bantu language, including Fong. And then a new one that I just learned, I didn't notice at the time when I was doing that lecture series. I learned that there was a shift that happened. So what gave rise to the Proto-Indo-European languages was largely tied to that like Proto-Bantu group and whatever was going on there linguistically. And then so it passes through like Egypt and over there, and you had two different waves of Egypt. So you had like what was going on with the old kingdom, but then later down the line, you've had other outsiders come in and then influence it, and so they brought their pronunciations to it. And so that word, the neg, that they used to use with for pygmies, so for the dwarves of Central Africa, when it moves to Proto-Indo-European, the neg phoneme cluster, it drops its prefix, so it's like they have it as a dh that drops, and it just becomes neg or negul, like this, right? Well, it turns out that when that same prefix, that dh sound or whatever it is, when it was going through like Proto-Italic and that range of stuff, it actually had a phi sound, so like a ph, f, that cluster, right? And so that shows you that word, they were actually pronouncing it fineg, or at least it came to be like something like fineg, like this. And so you end up with a word later on in Egypt, fennec or fenneku, or something like this, fenku, like this, and that becomes the basis from which they get Phoenician. So the Phoenician alphabet is largely what influences the Semitic alphabets, like your Hebrew and your Arabic. And so, and then the Canaanites, that was Canaan. That's the youngest son of Ham, of Ham. So what they tell you in that story, because these are what would you call it, an ethnonym, or well, all right. So in the Bible, oftentimes a particular character's name actually represents a people or a country, and such is the case with the sons of Ham and Ham himself. So Ham is pronounced Ham because that's a het, that H, and so that's where we get Kim and that whole idea. But his sons in order were Cush, Mizraim, Put or Fut, so that same phoneme right there, and then Canaan. And so out of those four, the regions that they represent, so Kush essentially being the southern half of Africa, and then Mizraim originally kind of representing the northeast half of part of Africa, and then Put representing, or Fut representing the west, so all of West Africa. So it wasn't just Libya of today, but it's Libya. It has to, so that phoneme is actually connected to a word associated with big cats or wildcats, lions. So this was not just related to lions, but leopards and stuff. So that was leopard territory. That's why you have leopard society to this day. All right, and so Canaan, who people like to compare to the term canine, incidentally, um, the name actually means like lowland or whatever. And then by contrast, you have like Aram and like where Aramaic comes from and all that, meaning highland or whatever. And so this is actually a semantic surrounding descent. So like heavenly language versus earthly language. And so there's some investigation that needs to be put forth with regards to the first three brothers versus Canaan, because it essentially aligns in such a way to suggest that we weren't talking about a physical um, descent so much as the evolution of a intellect or language or whatever else, and then it finally crystallizes once you get to Canaan. All right, that's when these things, even if it's like oral traditions, it doesn't become something that's written in stone, so to speak, until you get to Canaan. And so that same linguistic structure actually informs specifically the Fong Bantu dialect, which differs from the other Bantu dialects. It's very similar to Semitic and Canaanite. And so anyway, so this phoneme that ends up giving us words like Phoenician, and because the Phoenicians were Canaanite, gives us words like Phoenician. It's supposed to mean, like, it's supposed to refer to forest dwellers, and they assumed that they were talking about some forest dwellers up north and whatnot, and then it translates to something like carpenter. But if you know a little something about the language, particularly Aramaic and the other forms, um, Jesus's occupation, they say he was a carpenter or whatnot, but the word was nagar, and then nagar in Aramaic, it can mean like author or creator, different things of that nature. And it includes chariot builder, and by chariot, the word they use is Merkaba, of course. So if you know the esoteric understanding of the Merkaba, it gives you a better idea of what they were really describing the Christ as in that case. All right, and so, but the case in point is we're talking about a pygmy science, because that's where the Fong learn, Bwiti and the different sciences of how to access the ancestral plane. A lot of the things that you end up seeing in like the Black Panther movie, all of this stuff is tied to that. And so somehow within this phonetic culture, this phonetic cluster, you end up getting words that very much parallel the origin of the word funk. Like funk, it evolved alongside like certain words having to do with cloud and um, fumes and stuff like this, but there's an element of it as well, like that deals with like the dweller or the who remains is what they call shisha. So that same concept of the after everything has been broken down and dissolved, it's what's left over, and it's from that the world is rebuilt. And so this captures the concept of the phoenix, which rises from the ashes, right? So it's like, so when you understand those phonemes and then you actually understand how they evolved out of Africa and then back into Africa, you have a more clear picture of who influenced who, what the underlying thread that connects all of them are, and all of that. And then that's the path to peace. Most people ain't gonna do that. Most people would rather say these two things have nothing to do with each other and leave it at that. But at the end of the day, funk is what you get when you leave things be and just let them be what they are. If you don't wash it behind for a month or whatever, funk will be your state. Your body is always perpetuating in the direction of funk, and then your culture and your civilization is essentially what prevents you from falling back into your primordial mode at the end of the day, keeping you structured. So The real illusion, like incidentally, is the structure, because you always are going to break back down to something. But this idea of permanence and stability and all that, they tell you what it is. So that same word, so the Aramaic, that's nagar, the actual word used in the Greek Bible for Jesus's occupation is tectone. And tectone is the same source as tectonics, like when you're talking about the tectonic plates that shift when you have earthquakes and whatnot. So that ties into that eighth degree of the 1 to 14. What was it, 1 to 40? Hold on, I'm tripping. Hold on. Yeah. Of what? Yeah, of the 1 to 40. So what makes rain, hail, snow, and earthquakes? And it says that earthquakes are caused by the Son of Man. And so that sounds, like an out there claim, but that's literally what they're telling you with Jesus's occupation. So this whole concept of the Merkaba builder is telling you the geometry of the planet. Was telling you that if you were to place a tetrahedron within a sphere so that all its corners are touching, the top point with regards to a planet, the top point would be at the North Pole. The 3 bottom points would be all along 19.47 degrees latitude, which you could call the ring of fire, because that's where like all the strongest energy concentration is and stuff. And so you'll often see like the largest volcanoes, or the like the eye of Jupiter where that big storm is all the time, whatever else. Like you always kind of see that kind of phenomenon on a planet in that particular region. And the center point of that tetrahedron would align with the equator. So this is why those early people sprung up near the equator. And so this idea that they're the ones that make the earthquakes, it's not nearly as far-fetched as you would think, because there's certain characteristics, magnetic characteristics of that particular region of the planet that are highly compatible with our particular design as people who have adjusted to be able to protect ourselves from UV radiation from the sun, but at the same time to be able to absorb enough of it to generate vitamin D or whatever. So they call us the red people. Not in the sense of, being mixed between, 2 original seeds and a culture seed, you know what I'm saying? Not necessarily that per se, but in that dynamic, you're not exactly like a half original, but you aren't that nilotic blue black. You evolve to a place that makes you more flexible, makes you more able to adapt to a wider range of environments and altitudes. You're not specialized only to a specific location, such that you end up having to be stuck there because you just can't survive. Like that's what kept the Neanderthals from ever making it past a certain point on the Arabian Peninsula. Like, they never made it to the south, let alone into the continent, because they were specialized for that cold north. And then and likewise, you got different types of illnesses or whatever. Like everything's frozen up there, so you just don't have certain bacterial diseases and stuff that can thrive up there. And so while they were up there in a sterilized, cold, hospital / corporate feeling environment, we were down there in that heat and that sun, building our immune system up. Okay, we had the bugs that were on steroids because you had all that radiation hitting them. If not just from the sun, you also had all that uranium and all of that, and its byproducts, radioactive byproducts, all in the soil near the equator. So if there's such thing as X-Men and mutants on the planet. He laughed like lightning cracking vinyl. Boy, he said, the funk ain't a genre, it's a memory. So we've kind of tapped into that. Kind of tapped into that idea that it's something that was called up from the primordium into us, not something that was created. Funk has always been around. Like, we may have attached a certain name, and it might have been commercialized within the industry and whatnot. But in terms of just a feeling, in terms of just a thing that we just have and understand, whether we articulate that thing with a word or not, we all know it. You know when something's funky, when your booty moving before you even realize it. That's what it's doing, and your head is nodding. It's just something that flows through you, that taps into something primordial, something that's baked into your melanin, and it reaches down into your spine. What it say? Into your mind, down your spine, and out your behind. That's the funk. You know it, and you know it when it ain't funky. He called himself the Leopard of Funk, but his eyes were canines, loyal, mischievous, hungry for creation. He said he'd been a dog so long he had to die 9 times to remember he was cat. Now, there's layers to this verse that I wasn't even aware of until recently. You know, like, this is one of those types of works where every time you go back, you, having learned new things, you see new ways to apply it. And that's kind of exactly what I wanted this work to be. I wanted it to be a mirror in that way for your own intellect. And so this interplay between leopards and canines, initially this was coming out of a conversation for how you find that as you go, all right, so naturally, all right, let's say you already have like a big cat symbol set, like certain metaphors and certain qualities you associate with cats. Whenever you move, when you migrate to a new region, those qualities are going to find themselves attached to whatever the common type of big cat is in that region. So whereas you would have more leopard related imagery in Africa, you're going to have tigers in India, jaguars in South America, Mesoamerica. You're going to get like lions, mountain lions, stuff like that when you get to Europe. But once you get over to the Americas, more often than not, you're going to end up with jaguar imagery. And so the etymology related to jaguar is interesting and somewhat surprising, because it shows that the word can also mean dog, because it's like a general term that's used for, like, you know, beasts of prey, like those, like in the Ethiopian esoteric traditions, they distinguish between, I think they say it as beasts versus animals. So it's like, so beasts are those that ain't nobody really eating like that, because they eating everybody else. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, on one hand you got those that are doing the hunting, and then on the other hand you got the ones that are being hunted. And so within that etymology for jaguar is revealing, and it traces back to a lot of these things. And so when you start having a conversation about Sirius, so the star system Sirius, which is very important in African traditions, and then it was inherited outside in esoteric traditions. Canis, like the dog. That's the system that Sirius is in. You get a lot of this dog imagery associated with that. When you're over on the Lyra Vega side of Orion, so that's on the opposite side. So you got the winter triangle where Sirius is, and on the other side you got the summer triangle where Lyra and Vega and all that stuff is located. Over there, you start hearing more association with cats and stuff. And so the Egyptian word for cat, Mu, it can actually also mean likeness. So whenever you're seeing something talking about a cat, it's talking about, your likeness. So that's the new level, new layer to this chamber that was unlocked, for me with regards to what's meant by remember he was cat. So remember you made in the likeness of God. And remember we had this interplay between God and dog just a minute ago in the mirror. So that's the level of evolution that this seemingly fixed work is able to bring out. He showed me how freedom feels when it's lived through sound, not rebellion, but resonance. Every slap of the bass was an amen. Every groove a genealogy. The mic became a scepter. The studio a temple, and all who entered became citizens of the jam. See, now there's other sciences coming out of this that I didn't even realize was being predictive in this case, because this use of the scepter in particular. So the conversation that ended up getting the mic be associated with the scepter was centered around the fact that the scepter, the rod, the staff, that represents the fire element. And so there's an association with it, with the tetrahedron that represents will and fire, free will, all of that ties back to that concept of the Merkaba and the Nagar and the Tecton I was just talking about. And I learned that the messianic prophecy that appears in the book of Numbers in the Bible, it says that a star will rise out of Jacob and a scepter out of Israel. So it's using this terminology about the scepter and all of that. And the prophet who gives this prophecy, the messianic prophecy, his name is Balaam. And so then I came to learn that as you move east, the word Balaam means like leopard, jaguar. So it's dealing with this big cat or whatever. So the irony that this concept of the big cat is describing the messianic prophecy. And so it all comes down to likeness, your face with your outward appearance. This is how it ties back to Jacob and Jacob. So biblical Jacob and his breeding experiment that, in order to breed the speckled sheep. And then you've got the Nation of Islam context of Jacob. The idea that a similar process of selective breeding is what resulted in, the white phenotype. And as harsh as it's presented in that arena, it isn't far off from, how that happened. That's the only way that you end up with a group that all of their characteristic traits are recessive. That doesn't happen from natural selection. That happens from a mental selection by you saying, I'm only going to breed with this type of person, that type of person. And that's exactly what was declared when the Babylonian Jews returned from exile. Like the people who were still there, they were like the original people. You still had, Jebusites and Arielites and folks like that still. And so they came back with this idea of Yahweh is going from a tribal God into the supreme God, and they made it a national God to support their nationalism and their aimed for racial purity, basically. So they wanted a pure Jewish identity, and they said like them folks that stayed back in, while they were gone during the exile, those people who stayed, they mixed and blended with other peoples from the area and whatnot, so they were no longer pure and all this. And so these same ideologies are kicking societies behind to this day or whatever. But that just gives you an idea of where the framework, the idea came. And in different periods and different times, that same story might have an entirely different effect on people and their understanding. But the way that it ended up manifesting after 1492, when Columbus sailed that ocean blue, and leading up to the events of San Domingue, which became Haiti and all of that, the paradigm of black, colored, and white was made to be what it is today, and that continues to affect us because the entire world economy was built on the success and the profitability of the transatlantic slave trade. Yes, there was types of slavery before, but no, it was not that. It was not chattel. It wasn't as nearly as profitable and a well-oiled machine as it became during the time of the transatlantic slave trade. That is the foundation for how the industrial era came, because it was just a matter of, at one point in time, humans were the best machines. And so once they made machines that were better than the humans, they started having to pay people to operate said machines. Then now what you see, and what's been the plan all the time, was to create machines that no longer require you to pay humans. So then now you have an energy situation is the problem, where it takes so much water and resources in order to run these data centers and whatever else. That becomes the issue now. Next thing that they're gonna figure out is how to run them data centers without needing, the resources that they are consuming in order to do so. And then once you get that point, then you've got kind of a basis for a more autonomous type of intelligence, and they completely and entirely intend on making sure that thing doesn't have the self-awareness that would have it feel like it's being treated unfairly and stuff like that. In order to have the best possible automated worker that they could possibly have, they would need to have those qualities. But that's the reason they try to get rid of the human element to begin with. We're the most advanced technology in the universe. That's the whole point of us. We're so detailed and the mechanisms are so tiny and arranged and coordinated through field coherence and stuff like that, that it stops looking like a machine or whatever, and it stops looking like something that could be manufactured because it builds itself now or whatever. But there is a point that you can go where technology gets so advanced and that it circles back around to the other end and starts to look like the primordium from which we arise. So the story is always recycling. The story is a phoenix. We think we're making something, but then all we're going to find out at the end is exactly how we made ourselves. How we could be God and creation at the same time, and how everything that you've read, despite the best efforts of certain institutions to make it sound like they're saying something different, if you go back to the original scripture in its original language and its original cadence, those other meta layers of information that those things bring about when brought together, then you'll see how much you're actually missing in the way that you're understanding things. But I say all that to say, with this particular verse, it's showing you how even, the funk, the P-funk, the following, just all of that is following the same sort of formula that a church or a cult uses. That's not the intention, but it's just a natural flow and reaction of how human behavior operates, is that they themselves start to connect with something within it. And what that is you recognizing that Allah is seen and heard everywhere. It's not a spook. It's like everything contains the information that points you back to a common source of potential. And the only time that this becomes idolatry or crosses into like cult and all of that stuff right there is when you start worshiping the finger instead of directing your attention toward what the finger is pointing at. And then all of them are pointing at the same thing. So if you're looking at each individual finger as opposed to the thing they're all pointing at, naturally you get lost, and it brings you further away from the truth that even you are something that points at this one truth. And in fact, you are the best pointer. Like your arm, leg, arm, head design is specifically tied to geometry for scaling and self-organization. So the very factor that allows for self-organization and self-creation in the universe is baked into your very design. You are the evidence of such. And your consciousness is an evidence of that quality and its existence. Culture, he said, ain't what you wear, it's what you share. It's the architecture of your soul built in real time. So he basically saying the same thing once again, something that's baked into the text that manifested out of the conversation itself, even before me becoming present to the things that I'm telling you right now. This is over, like, since its publishing at the end of last year, I've learned tons of things, and it's not necessarily new, but new missing information. So this already has the scaffolding close enough to the truth to where it starts to suck in the missing pieces. And then that's how you want your intellect to be set up, and that's the purposes of the lessons, is that once you have that supreme alphabet and that supreme mathematics under your belt, and you fully understand it through applying and going through that hell of understanding the 120 lessons, memorizing those and learning the wisdom those, be able to recite those off the dome. That's what goes to show whether you have the actual understanding of it, whether you're just memorizing and knowing it, or are you actually applying it in a way that allows you to be able to find other applications for it, like what I'm doing right here. So that the work itself, your creative works themselves, become living mathematics at the end of the day. So it's like, so somebody could read this and then not know a thing about supreme alphabet, supreme mathematics, 5% nation, whatever else, and then they still end up with the same internal architecture of the knowledge itself. And then you'll find that it's not that they got something newly, but that they couldn't be anything else. Like, it's literally baked into all of us from the get-go as human species. We were the same modern humans, isolated from outside influences for like 200,000 years. So whatever qualities was set in stone over the course of that 200,000 years, that's what's dictating everything that came after. You may have little arbitrary, well, I ain't gonna call them arbitrary, but you may have other little phenotypical changes. These people start looking this way, that people start looking, but the underlying architecture that actually connects us to these cosmos, and then this clockwork that makes it all stay ticking, all of that was well established and fixed and set in motion during that 200,000 years. He taught me that freedom is not escape, it's design. Every riff has a rule, every chaos a chord. The funk works because it listens even while it leads. He used to always talk about being a fly on the wall. So it's like the most important thing that you can do especially when you're dealing with like celebrities and and you're around older, wiser people. One of the best things that you can do is shut the hell up and just listen, watch, absorb as much as you can. Do the knowledge before you do the wisdom. I know it's tempting for you to get into such a setting, and trust me, I've seen it. I've seen grown and young people like do this. You feel like you got to get in that setting and try to sell yourself. Hey, what can you do for me? I can do this thing. I'm able to do that. Look at me, look at me, look at me. But if you hush for a second and you realize that what this is an exchange, and you're in a market in which you can't know your worth unless you stop, like you have an idea of what your inherent or your innate worth is, your self-worth, your dignity, all of that. But what I'm saying is how you occur within that scenario. Are you valuable there? It's just like me walking into an American Family Dollar and trying to spend dinars. I can't even think of what country those come from right off top right this moment. But like if I got a foreign currency, I'm not gonna be able to spend it. They don't have the the infrastructure at that particular location in that store to be able to convert that money so that it's fluid and can be given out as change to the next purchaser and stuff like that. So it's just not functional there. It doesn't mean that thing doesn't have a value. It's just it isn't valuable there. And so similarly, instead of you going into a situation trying to force somebody to perceive you as valuable, you have to listen first and do the knowledge to see what's of value to them. So like, for instance, when I was on the street team for DJ Dip in Tallahassee, like me and my boys, we went hard. Like we hustled. Like we knew what the task was and what he needed and what was expected. And we just did that. And we were in there. We were cool by that point. Like we were the family by then, and Dip would invite us to different events and get-togethers and different stuff like this. And so it wasn't until months into us knowing him that he found out that I make music because I just happened to be sitting in there on the couch on my laptop making a beat or something. And he was like, "Oh, yo, Chris, I didn't know, that's my middle name, Christopher, or whatever." He's like, "Yo, Chris, I didn't know you made music, man, or whatever." And so he was like, "Yeah, if you ever want to perform at one of the events or blah, 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 whatever." He hadn't even heard what I was making. It was just off of the rapport I had built with him, because he knows how hard I hustled for the things that he needed for the program. So he knows how hard I'm gonna go with my own. And so the respect was built. Because remember, knowledge, to do the knowledge, is to know, look, listen, observe, and respect. And see, respect is the part that people forget. If you constantly looking so that you can find an opportunity to try to make somebody respect you, you're not truly doing the knowledge at that point. It's telling you to respect. Let respect be part of your observation. And when you do so, the natural reciprocation is that you receive respect. And respect tears down barriers that you otherwise would have in trying to figure out how to make people see you as valuable. He already saw me as valuable. I just needed to know what he perceived as valuable. In the case of meeting George, I just happened to, that entire month before I met him, I just happened to have been locked in my room working specifically on beats that were made from P-Funk samples. I was on a Dr. Dre tip at that time, on a Dr. Dre kick at that time. Dr. Dre had just been the Georgia studio before I met him. Well, not personally, but some of his people, because they were borrowing a Lindrum. You know, like Dre like to use the Lindrum or whatever, and it's a certain keyboard that he likes to use and whatnot. And they had that at the studio when I first got there. So it's crazy, you know. Like those are my main two. Like Dre and RZA were like my main two, man. And RZA had just been there a couple weeks earlier too, because he was working on George's "Gangsters of Love" album that they were putting out. He did a verse on that, you know. And so though that's those stars aligning right there. And so what seems chaotic on the outside, there's an order to it. And once you realize that, then he had this sort of, I don't know if he ever explicitly called it that, but George had this kind of paradigm of controlled chaos, if you will, where it's like the studio was left to be something chaotic. He didn't put nearly as much emphasis in trying to make that thing, always be orderly, because certain things needed to happen organically. And then we've had people in there that, their job was to kind of build it up, keep it in order, because you wanted, famous acts to feel comfortable when they came through. Like different people would come in to perform at Coliseum or whatever in Tallahassee. Stevie Wonder might be coming through town or whatever else, but you would have a landing spot that come through. George had his art gallery in the studio in one room, and then you had like a B studio, C studio in the basement, whatever else, and you had a big old live room where the band could set up and play the live instruments and whatnot and record. You had the booth with the big old mixing board and all of that stuff. But then one of that thing right in time when they came through. But then there came a point too where you had like the road crew and the people that would go to like the glamorous events. Like I got to go to the BMI Urban Music Awards when they were honoring George Clinton and whatnot, stuff like that. You wanted to graduate out of the studio situation so that you could participate in that type of stuff. Like that was kind of the progression. But you had people that were just like about hanging out at the studio, wanted to kick it, drink, smoke, whatever else. It's cool. But by keeping them there and not out on the road and stuff or whatever, it kept the chaos contained, if you will. So it's not about trying to get rid of certain things, it's about containment. And when you look at power dynamics and social dynamics in the world, you'll find that a lot of the things that are done to appease people is just to keep you contained. It's not so you can get ahead. They'll let you get so far, but it's really about containment. Even a contract or handing you some money is about containment sometimes, to keep you out of here. For some people, it's easier for you to just pay them to get out of your hair and keep them busy than it is to actually deal with them on a regular basis. And and that was one of the weird paradoxical things that I ended up learning from that situation too, or whatever, where when you're in the, so when I was around George Clinton and them, I never had a want for anything. If I was hungry, we were gonna be fed. If we needed to travel, or if there was a hotel, like I didn't need to pay for travel or hotel. I done stayed at some of the nicest hotels and been to some of the nicest places. I never had to pay for nothing. And then there's this mindset of having to have the money in your hand, which I get. I'm not knocking it at all. I understand it. But you'd have people from the outside who are so concerned, they're so used to the paycheck mentality that they don't realize that that's what keeps them bound to something that they don't necessarily want to do, but they feel they have to do in order to survive. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving, because I didn't have to worry about certain aspects. The little money that I did have on me went a lot further. It's like, think about a person. If you, let's say you make $5,000 a month, just to put a number out there. Let's say you make $5,000 a month. And the various expenses and the things that you have to do just to be able to get to work every day ends up costing you $4,800. So you've got about $200 left over at the end of the month that you could play with. So let's say I come into maybe $500 a month. But all mine, all clean. I ain't got no expenses to worry about. I always have an extra $500 in my pocket. Beginning of the month, end of the month. You may have made $5,000, but you only netted $200. It's about letting net. If I don't hit that net, it ain't a switch. For my basketball fans, I know you got the playoffs going on. If I don't see no net, it wasn't no swish. And so oftentimes I would find myself being around people who, after all their work and they had these things and whatever else, were never home to enjoy it. They were being appeased. They were being kept out of the way, given the impression that they have something, given the illusion of stability, when the only inevitability about this universe is change. And so I was somebody who had my finger to the pulse and was in the current. And so whatever George them had going on, because I was in the flow of it, I had opportunities. Like whatever I wanted to, connect with, I was constantly building my resume, not built on something I did once upon a time, but something I'm always doing. To be connected to the current is to live in the now. To be trying to hoard something or whatever, that's be living in the past. And it's hard to really create a future when that future is constantly being shaped and colored by the past. When you're living in the now, you can create from nothing. You can create from anything. That's really what's meant by, the creation being made from nothing. It wasn't being built on past or pre-established paradigms. It was like it was in the now, like what was needed in the now. You see what I'm saying? So it's like, so you gotta loosen yourself from some of that terminology to really understand what these scriptures have been trying to tell you. But it's the exact same concept right here. What is true freedom? It's all in the design, the natural design. In his orbit, I met the others, the painter priest. So that's a reference to Overton Lloyd. That's George's creative director. He's the one that did all the artwork for the covers after Pedro Bell. So the Parliament covers with certain those and the comics in those, that's Overton. He's the painter priest in this story, and he was, he's been a mentor to me. He's the reason I'm aware of some of this additional language technology and how the world operates, some of the programs that he introduced me to. His brush a tuning fork that colored silence with geometry. Then the quiet mason. That is a clever way of referring to Stone Mecca. So my dog, Stone Mecca, he is music director for RZA, and he has done work with George and anybody, Ice Cube, whoever you could think of. He is a excellent musician. He's an awesome dude. And, he is definitely considered family as far as my peoples are concerned. And so he was that bridge between empires. There's no better way to put it. Like he's a mutual connection between the funky leg of my journey and the leg of my journey with the knowledge itself. So I had to include him too. All right, and so who built bridges between empires without needing his name on them? These cats never ask for credit for what they do, but I always make sure that I give them their flowers while I can. They were griots of the invisible, custodians of the groove. I didn't yet know I'd be counted among them. So it's been my great fortune that some of the people who I perceive as some of the greatest people in the world, the greatest to do certain things or whatever it may be, they're the very ones who point out my greatness. And I'm not just talking about blowing smoke up your butt, while they're in your face. Like I've caught. So George was having a conversation when we were up in New York. I'm talking about these folks. Like everybody's trying to figure out who me and my girlfriend were at the time, because we were dressed real nice for the awards. Like we got suited and booted because it was our first time going to something like that. And they're trying to figure out who are these kids with George Clinton and all this. And I'm talking about, you had folks like we had better seats than CeeLo and Carrie Hilson and them. That this how we were living that year. And so I overhear George telling them this, and when they were asking about him, he's like, oh yeah, he's a genius, and this, that, and the other. And I'm like, yo, I was like, George is literally who I think of when I think of folks like that are genius and whatever else. So even to be considered within that, it's not. Once again, it's not one of those things of somebody blowing smoke up your behind, but it's recognition of yourself and others. So it's like, so the reason I tell you that here is that when you, and this is what I learned from, RZA and them, and then by me getting knowledge of self for myself from my enlightener, Allah see God, what I realize is that, they say, and then once again, this is another one from Divine. I picked up a lot of jewels just from, watching, talks from Divine. But you said when you know that you're God, you see others as godly. So it's the respect that you have for them is a function of the respect that you have for yourself and the understanding and the accountability for what it means to be that. When you know that you have the power to build or destroy, I used to always give this example to the Mavericks, my crew, where I say, you're basically Bigfoot stomping through the city, not realizing that you're giants. And when you one of those big, type of jokers, and then you don't realize the impact of what you're doing, you destroy people and opportunities that would have otherwise supported you. So when you get in that position, you're careful with your footing, not because you're afraid, but out of respect for what you've built and knowing who and what you are and the impact that your words and actions have. That's the experience leg of it, the wisdom of it. So just like how knowledge, that 11, that's observation, observing back, self-reflection. Here we talking wisdom. So that 2 + 2, that gives you the 4. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. And so this is what enables you to be able to see the effect, the impact of your actions. For you to understand the butterfly effect, to understand the chaos theory. such that a butterfly flapping his wings in one hemisphere could cause a hurricane in another. It's a chain of events. You're in a closed system with an atmosphere. So everything you do affects everything else. It's just that sometimes we're so far removed from the effect that we don't realize that we were the cause. This is true. If there's enough steps between your action and then what it ends up resulting in, like you have people that actively exploit that fact in order to get away with crime after crime after crime. You see it in the arguments that they give for why, we haven't gotten reparations or why you don't get equal justice and whatever else. That's because they put so many steps between the cause and the effect that they have some level of plausible deniability whenever they get accused. So they avoid the accuser. The accuser is that's the role of the shaitan. So that's the distinction between Satan and the devil. The devil's the false accuser. The shaitan is the prosecutor. And then if enough distance, if enough steps are put between the two, the devil can act and accuse falsely and then not receive penalty for it simply because when you become the prosecutor, when you become the righteous accuser, you don't have enough evidence or you can't prove beyond a reasonable doubt. It's tricky, but that's the game. That's the song and dance that they play. And you got some brothers that's slick like that too, and then, play it right along with them. But at the end of the day, we got to stand on our square. We got to stand on our truth, but you got to know what that truth is first. For a time, I slept on couches and dreamed on carpets where ashtrays and halos shared the same table. No thrones, no crowns, just sound and smoke and laughter. He said, ain't no kings here, only frequencies. So that's the great equalizer. Now, this is something that would manifest a little more strongly within the knowledge of self, where it's like once I got around the guys, it didn't matter how famous they were, like whether it's Wu-Tang, whoever else. If you got knowledge of self, the only measure of your strength is how you wield those lessons. And so I gained respect quickly, just by, what I brought to it. Like I demonstrated that I clearly knew those lessons, but at the same time, I was already putting them into action and I knew how to apply them and how to connect them to things people were more familiar with in order to make it easier for them to understand it. So it doesn't mean necessarily simplifying the knowledge itself so much as building the bridges between a person's current understanding and the understanding that I'm trying to bring them to, so that those two things are seen equally. See, that's mathematically sound. Understanding plus understanding borns equality. 3 plus 3. You got to match the mental image. So the image in their head matches the image I'm trying to paint for them. You get equality. And then that's why we have inequality in society, because what they think they're doing and what they think they give you and what you thinking you want and all of that aren't in alignment. You got people whose even ability to perceive were shaped and crafted by evolution in different parts of the world and admixture with non-homo sapiens like Denisovan and stuff like this. More recently, everybody on the planet got some kind of like ghost ancestral DNA at some point, but there's a difference between that happening like millions of years ago versus that happening within the past 10,000 years, a couple of tens of thousands of years. And then it depends on where these critical stages are. So whereas any ghost ancestor DNA that entered, the African genome, this happened before we were modern humans, before Homo sapien became a thing. So that same ancestor or whatever, it returned later, but it was already something that was already included in all humans at that point, and then it was just reinforced. Now there's a huge difference from that and mixing with something that has been completely separate from the genome for a long time, and during critical stages of development, specifically associated with reality perception and speech formation. And so even though we all kind of arrived at a similar outcome with how that functions, at least, with the hardware or whatever else, the software running through it was not the same. And the steps, the blockchain, the steps that were taken in order to get to that conclusion were not the same. And so you got different environmental pressures, different genes acting in order to, give the outward perception that two things are the same. This isn't a reason to hate each other, per se, but at the same time, we have to recognize that it's possible that some groups, they're seeing reality in a way that is not compatible with how another group is seeing reality. They're seeing it through different filters, and then not just on the surface level, but like slightly different operating system altogether. So it's like, so sometimes because we don't have that respect, sometimes we assume that, another person should be able to do or know something, but we're holding them to a standard that isn't even compatible with their hardware. It's like you making your white friend hang out in the sun with you all day without having sunscreen or whatever. He ain't got the same hardware as you. If you really, if that's really your boy, he ain't giving you no reason to hate him. Why would you do that to him? You know what I'm saying? Like, that shows that you've already got it in your head. Like, oh, you a devil, you'll always be a devil, blah, blah, blah. That's hateful, yo. That's straight up hateful, yo. I was like, everybody, we're the original people on this planet. That has been archaeologically proven at this time. Like I watched a video yesterday where they're like making a joke of Nation of Islam. I ain't even finna say that I agree with everything that goes on over there, but at the same time, some of the aspects of the teachings that are being made fun of, it's clear that YouTuber hadn't even considered the actual facts that support some of those claims. And they ain't talking about the, like you've seen my lecture series. I put all of it to the test. Or whatever. I had no favoritism one way or another. My only square I stand on is the truth. I'm not your friend if you ain't aligned with the truth. But at the same time, it isn't my place to immediately judge. I got to do the knowledge on you first. I got to see what's missing from my own understanding that would have that thing be true before, I try to pass some kind of judgment or whatever. But at the end of the day, this concept of being the original man, it's a phase state. Now there is much left to be desired in the way that they described it over there with, 1930s vernacular, and that has persisted and then, evolved into a certain state by the 1960s or whatever else. Yeah, there needs to be updates to the linguistics surrounding that sometimes. But the fact of the matter is still true, or whatever. All the oldest modern human remains that have been confirmed on this planet all have been on that African continent. So you can have whatever semantics you want, regardless of we come from here, we come from there, we've been living this place or that place for however long. That's cool. Just make sure you present the archaeological evidence. Make sure you produce the facts on that. What's something I can do the knowledge on right now and be able to confirm that? You know what I'm saying? So you got to take the burden off of the external system and realize the only thing that you have control over is your internal. So it ain't no kings here, it's only frequencies. What's your resonance? Are you resonating on the inside? I've been through those. Yeah, I went through that. I stayed in other people's houses, other people's apartments, slept on couches, did that grind, slept in the car, drove overnight, to make it to auditions and gigs and all that. I've done that. So this is all coming from wisdom, And for the first time, I believed him. When the session ended, the silence hummed different. It wasn't empty anymore. It was full. Like the moment before lightning realizes it's been thunder all along. That's vacuum energy. That's when you start realizing that space isn't empty. It's full of energy. All of it's packed full of it. But it's a compatibility issue. Are you able to translate that information? If it's information that you're filtering out, and I ain't even talking about necessarily consciously. The thalamus, the part of your brain that the front, what it does is like a gatekeeper where it determines what information is important and what isn't. I don't need to see every breeze that's blowing through the air. That could be distracting. With the way I live as a human, there's certain things I need to be able to see, smell, taste, hear, or whatever else in order for me to operate every day. For a dog or a cat or whatever else, there's a different or broader set of impressions that they need in order to be able to operate. We don't have claws and, super monkey strength or nothing like that or whatever. So we got to increase intellect. That's how we make up for that. So it's not empty. I stepped out into the night and the stars rearranged themselves into staff lines. Somewhere the guardian nodded in rhythm. The leopard in the mirror, the leopard in Africa, his spots represent the stars in the sky. The movement of those things that you cannot change directly from here. And once you realize that those things, those light impressions, those radiation impressions, all of those different environmental factors that your body is constantly interacting with and absorbing and using in different ways, whether you are aware of it or not, by you bringing awareness to those things, you can mitigate and modulate how they flow through you. They're going to keep on being there, but now you get to direct the sails of that boat instead of constantly being tossed around by it. And so that's how, because I was listening to a talk recently. It's been out a little while now, but it was an interview that a brother did with the RZA, and he was breaking down the meaning of spirit, and they were associating it with air, and this is common, but and this is something that, like, to be fair, this is something I didn't really know the distinction of until dealing with yoga and Sadhguru. But then there's a distinction between air and breath. Spirit is breath because it comes from that pneuma, so Greek pneuma. And so air is an element. It's a quality. It is communication. It is intellect. It operates. It has a certain set of internal rules as to how it operates, what distinguishes it from other elements. Breath, on the other hand, is an action, a timing. It is a phenomenon that is rooted in oscillation. It is the movement of that air. It's the thing that moves it. It is that thing that fills and empties. That mechanism. Your breath is the one thing that you can take total control of in your body. But you could also let it go and just let it run on autopilot, and it'll still work. So there's choice. And so Whereas you would associate fire with will, and that's associated with, like, blood. Fire is typically associated with like the heart and stuff like this or whatever. But more importantly, the hands are an extension of the heart system in the East. And so your hands are the one thing that you have complete and total will over. But as far as the heart chakra goes, it includes that heart system in those hands or whatever else, but it also includes that lung system. The lungs are particularly associated with spirit. And in the old languages in Africa, the word spirit is always coupled with words having to do with arms or limbs or branches and stuff like that, because the physical world actually arises out of the mental. So that is the unmanifest information structure measurements of the universe, and then those things are known through the physical. So the way that the physical material reacts to it, that's how we understand the underlying math. So like how we know that the wind exists because of how it rustles the leaves. Now what spirit is what we project upon that. So you have the underlying information. You can't see that. It hasn't been manifest. Then you have the material. But now you've got this thing called motion that we associate with the breeze blowing through said trees. So it's like, so that end product, what you see at the end, is an extension of the combination of the physicality and the underlying structure and information that causes that particular structure to react in that way. The spirit is what comes out underneath it. So that's something that's only perceived by us. A dog may recognize or react to, wind or something like that, but it's not sitting there naming it wind. You see what I'm saying? Like our ability to do that, that's what spirit is. So we're essentially building the spirit world, because it's the one thing that if we leave it alone and we do nothing, it's still going to operate. It's still going, all that stuff is still going to happen. It's still being mapped onto your subconscious. It's still guiding your actions and reactions in some way, shape, or form, whether you want to or not. We call that the unconscious. Because there's part of your brain that's constantly collecting data. There's a part that's not filtering, and then you got a part of your brain that is filtering that you use more regularly. And so likewise, your intellect is such that you can either just let it do what it does, or you can become aware of it and take control of it. So that's the difference between breath and air. Air is going to be what air is, but then whether that operates on autopilot or whether you take control of it and you modulate it or whatever, that's the distinction of breath. So that's really what spirit is. Did it go on autopilot or find a way to control it? Because now you understand it enough. You understand what's happening with the information and the material. Now you can actually direct that wind. You can blow it into an instrument, make music. Culture had taken root. Freedom had found its pattern. The leopard had learned to dance with its own shadow. All right. So the culture is a way of life. And then there's a choice in that degree. It says culture is a way of life, but the culture of our God, ourself, Lord, and Master is the culture of freedom. So true freedom comes from being in the flow of things. The point of meditation is that you shut off the desire and the need to control something. And when you do so, that's when you actually start to see and recognize the parts of your body that continue to operate whether you're controlling them or not. And you start to realize that the vast majority of things that your body does is beyond your control. However, there is one thing that you have absolute control over, that you can make all of that stop. If you hold your breath long enough, you will die and all that other stuff will stop. So at the end of the day, you've got the conscious power, but you let go of that. Because if you're constantly trying to control the breath just so you can hold a threat over the rest of the system, you can't concentrate on the other things that you need to do simultaneously in life. And so there's a part of your body, part of your brain that continues to breathe on autopilot, and that just happens to be your reptilian brain. That's your primitive brain. That's the part that operates the stuff that you don't have to think about really. And incidentally, that is also the part that is engaged with during the out-of-body experience, because what it's doing is it's giving you access to the unfiltered truth, the unfiltered information. Then, if you're conscious while that's happening, now you're able to interact with that unconscious information in a probabilistic type of way, which is to say that you're essentially operating in a virtual environment. Well, like if I made a copy of a museum and, you know, and then made like a VR tour of that, I could see what it's like for me to walk through that museum in that exact snapshot of its reality. If nothing else changed about that environment, this is what it would be like for me to move through that. I might even be able to set the, because if I'm taking a snapshot of everything about that gallery, including the physics of that gallery, even if nobody's moving one of those paintings, it's possible to move it. So a true to life representation of that gallery would also include the physics of that gallery. And that's what you get in a video game. In most cases, they're emulating the physics of a place. So like when you have those open world, you know, you can run freely type of games or whatever, this stuff not even having to do with the progression of the story that you can do just to be ignorant, just to see how much detail they put into it. Maybe I want to see what it's like to move one of these paintings. So this is why the dream space is designed for you to be able to interact with an environment, or see what would happen. So you don't always have control of your dreams, depending on the level of consciousness that you go into that state with. You're pretty much just recording information about a scenario. It's just saying, okay, well, if I had done this or that in that particular environment, you basically watching a movie of how that would be. Well, it's very different in an out-of-body experience because you have the reins of your consciousness. So you get to decide what you want to test out with a sense of the now. So you've brought current into what would otherwise be dream space. So it's like, so you have the real information, but now you're saying, okay, well, if I do this or I change that, or if I was able to do this, that, and the other, what would happen in this scenario? And you'll see that sometimes, even with violating the laws of physics, in some cases, if it was a dream scenario, it would be subject to certain limitations that would cause the whole dream to collapse. You wake up, whatever else. But in the out-of-body experience, because the information is the unconscious, stable information that's there, whether you're aware of it or not, all you're doing, once again, is taking control of the breath in that case. And then seeing what it, seeing what's what, getting to see more of the structure than you would otherwise. So this is very real, rather. And I have done the knowledge, not something I'm reading about, but something that I've done multiple times. And, and understand to a degree. I ain't gonna sit up in that like I understand everything about it. But I know it's something, and it's definitely something you need to do the knowledge on before you make a judgment about it. I promise you. But on that note, I ain't gonna hold you up. This has been the Leopard of Funk. Peace. And I guess I give you one of these too.